Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election in a scenario I haven't yet had the chance to touch on. Today I'll be talking about Vivek Ramaswamy in a presidential election, and I'll be doing a prediction of him versus Joe Biden, but broadly I'll be looking at why I think he would lose and why I think, though it's not likely if Republicans were to run him, he would be a pretty bad candidate. So, just for some context that will kind of guide my thinking throughout the course of this video, I'm assuming most of you guys watched the GOP debate. If you did not, you can watch my recap of where I talked about winners and losers. I personally thought Ramaswamy did not have a good night. I thought he got attacked, pretty consistently, didn't have any good rebuttals, especially for Chris Christie and Nikki Haley. And I would also say that Ramaswamy, he did a good job of really getting an inside lane with the Trump base or the people in the GOP that are really, really right wing. But I think beyond that, he didn't make himself any friends. He didn't expand his outreach. He didn't expand his outreach. And he did not do a good job of getting himself any good moments. He had he had moments where he came off as the better person in the interaction, but he did not have any good clips he can put on and say, yes, this is how I'm going to win a general election. This clip is something the majority of Americans would agree with. This is an electable thing to say. He didn't have that moment. I think Haley had the moment. I think Pence had that moment. I think arguably someone like Ron DeSantis had that moment, although, again, more of a mixed bag for him. And so, broadly speaking, Ramaswamy is such a right-wing candidate and such a firebrand, even more so than Trump, that I think he would lose to Joe Biden. So we're going to fill out the states that I don't really think are worth talking about here, the safe and likely states. So we're going to fill out states like New Mexico for Biden, same with Minnesota. And we're just going to kind of go through this on the quicker side of things. But as you can see here, Biden's already going to start out with a pretty good spot. He's going to be at 225 or 226 electoral votes. Ramaswamy's going to get some too. I think he would actually do worse in Montana than Trump by a good amount. I think he doesn't do well there. I think he does pretty poorly in Kansas. I think he wins Utah. I think he doesn't do that. I think Alaska could actually be a lean state, if we're being honest. I think we can put that in the lean column. I think he doesn't do great in Iowa or Ohio, but I think he'll win them. And I think in the South he does fine because he's a Republican. And then Florida we're not going to touch just yet. But these are, I think Ramaswamy would only really have 149 safe electoral votes, or even, I know Alaska and Maine too are lean, but it's pretty safe. And then I think the remainder of these states, I think he'd have a hard time winning the Rust Belt because he doesn't have any distinct working class people. I think Michigan could be borderline likely. And again, that gets Biden to 270. But just to kind of talk about that, I think in Wisconsin, Ramaswamy, Trump, the reason that Trump's competitive in Wisconsin, despite not doing great nationwide right now, is because he has a distinct appeal to voters in the driftless area. He's going to get amazing GOP turnout from rural areas. He's going to get really good numbers of the white working class voters. And Ramaswamy doesn't have that track record. Maybe he does, but he doesn't. There's no argument that you can make that Ramaswamy is going to, outrun in the working class counties of Wisconsin. There's no argument you can make that he's going to have the Trump level of needed rural turnout to win statewide. And so when you combine that with the fact that he is a right-wing candidate who's likely to lose ground in the suburbs of Milwaukee, which, again, are very Republican, but do swing against Republicans when they are running right-wing campaigns. You look at Trump, you look at Tim Michels, you look at Dan Kelly. I would say that those counties would definitely swing against Ramaswamy. I think Michigan's not really too much of a factor here, but he would obviously, I'd imagine, do very poorly in the suburbs of Detroit and Grand Rapids, which are the state's two biggest metro areas. And then I'd imagine he doesn't do great with rural turnout because, again, he has the downsides of Trump without the upside. I think he'd do really poorly in the suburbs because he's just such a right-wing candidate. I think he'd just crash with suburban women who are pro-choice. I think he would crash with educated voters and wealthy voters. And I think that he does not have the Trump upside of getting out the white working class vote and the rural vote. Because, again, Trump can win Wisconsin hypothetically if he just gets Herculean numbers in the northern rural part of the state and if he can continue the trends in the working class driftless region. Ramaswamy doesn't have that upside, and so I think that's why he loses these states. Pennsylvania, kind of a similar story. I'd imagine he would crash and burn in the Philadelphia suburbs. I think he'd do a really terrible job of winning over because, again, the Philly suburbs are actually one of the wealthiest areas in the nation. Montgomery County, Chester County, Delaware County, those are very affluent areas that are educated. They've been trending towards Democrats. They've been getting really good. They were obviously big for John Fetterman. A lot of people thought he would underperform by a good amount in Chester County. He ran even with Biden. He actually outran him in Delaware and Montgomery. And that just shows how far gone they are for Republicans. And so if they turn around and ran Vivek Ramaswamy, who is much more conservative than Dr. Oz, they would probably get killed, if I'm being honest. And obviously Ramaswamy would do fine in the rural areas, but he wouldn't get the turnout necessary to overcome that. And I think he'd lose Pennsylvania by 4 to 5 points. And then there goes the election, because once you have lost the Rust Belt, you've lost the election. And I think he'd lose Arizona and Georgia, pretty similar. I mean, maybe Georgia's tilt just because, like, Trump is just so hated in Georgia. Like, it is hard to explain how bad of a candidate Trump is for Georgia. He is, like, bad for Republicans in most swing states, but he is just terrible in Georgia. Like, Republicans have cost themselves so, like, Georgia is the state where Republicans have cost themselves the most because of Trump. And I think that this might be the one state where he runs even with Trump, or the one swing state rather. And so, like, I'm just gonna say that in the suburbs of Atlanta, maybe Ramaswamy can run even with Trump. Maybe he actually outruns him by a little bit, but does worse in the rural areas. I think he still loses it by like 1.5 points. So maybe he runs a little behind Trump, but he still is basically close to what he would be doing anyways. But Arizona is different because Arizona, it's a more, the suburbs of Arizona I think are a bit more elastic than the suburbs of Georgia, because the thing is, your Gwinnett counties of the world and if you don't know what I'm talking about, the immediate suburbs of Atlanta, which are getting more diverse, are turning blue. Obviously, in part because white voters are trending left, but also because you're diversifying. You have more Asian voters, more Hispanic voters, and more black voters, which are more Democratic demographics, and they're turning the suburbs blue. And so in Arizona, you don't have that. In Arizona, it's white educated voters that are swinging towards Democrats, and that's why if you went to, say, Scottsdale, Arizona, it would be a lot redder than if you went to North Fulton, Georgia, because I don't know any like super blue cities in the Atlanta suburbs off the top of my head, but obviously, I hope you get the gist of that, is that the immediate suburbs of Scottsdale, or the immediate suburbs of Phoenix, are a bit redder than the immediate suburbs of Atlanta because they are much whiter. And so that makes them more elastic because there's more white educated swing voters that might vote for a moderate Republican but will not vote for a Ramaswamy type candidate. And that's why I think Georgia swings more against Ramaswamy, or that's why I think Arizona swings more against Ramaswamy than Georgia would, just briefly. Obviously, I think Ramaswamy would have trouble in the rural areas just because he's not Trump. Any non-Trump Republican would have trouble in the rural areas with turnout, but that's obviously kind of a given. And then I think Ramaswamy loses North Carolina, probably by a little more than Georgia. I think this is actually an example of a state that could be weird with Ramaswamy, because I think he could lose it by more than Georgia, underratedly. And I say that because when you look at the suburbs of Charlotte, they're trending left. Cabarrus County, which voted for Trump by 20 in 2016, voted for him by under 10% in 2020. I think Ramaswamy could probably lose that county. And I think that when you look at Durham, Raleigh, Greensboro, those are areas in the northern part of the state, kind of in this region up here, that are really unfavorable to Republicans long term. They're growing. You have well-paying tech jobs in that area that are really, really making the state a lot more educated as a whole. And those voters, I think, are really just anti-Ramaswamy. Maybe they're more favorable for someone like Nikki Haley or Mike Pence or maybe even Ron DeSantis in a best-case scenario, but who knows? DeSantis is crashing and burning too. Ramaswamy and Trump are just immediate no-goes there. And so I think Ramaswamy even more, because Trump is a more known person than Ramaswamy. He has his voters, and there's a lot of people who don't like Trump, but they're still going to vote for him. Ramaswamy doesn't have that, historical precedent in America, because again, people underestimate the advantage of incumbency. Incumbency matters a lot. Donald Trump was one of the most unpopular presidents in American history, and in 2020, he was like 44,000 votes away from winning the Electoral College. Incumbency matters a lot. Now, Donald Trump's not the incumbent anymore, but he has the kind of half incumbency. We know what he's been like as president before. And so Ramaswamy doesn't have that. And I think just because of that factor alone, there are going to be a lot of suburban voters who are moderate voters that might even vote for Trump that are not comfortable with Ramaswamy just because he is a more right-wing candidate, both from a rhetoric standpoint and from a standpoint of just perceived electability. So I think he loses North Carolina. I think he loses Nevada, probably by 2 or 3, just because Nevada's inelastic, and he could lose it by more, but it's inelastic. And I think he wins Florida by like 3 maybe, and I think he wins Texas. Like, it's a close state in the election. I think he wins it by under a point. And just to talk about Texas for a second, it voted for Trump by 5.5 in 2020. I think Ramaswamy would, again, like I said, with the suburbs in North Carolina, in Georgia, in Arizona, and Pennsylvania, I think Ramaswamy does terrible with white educated voters. Just to be clear, I think he does like worse than Trump would do, because like I just touched on incumbency. I also think that Ramaswamy in Texas is toxic because the rural areas of Texas were like under Trump, they got really red. People don't realize this, but like just go to a New York Times map and look at the Panhandle County is up here in this region of Texas. They're like 90 to like go to like a random county. It's like 91% for Trump, 7% for Joe Biden, 2% for the Libertarians, right? Ramaswamy would get similar margins, but I don't think he'd have the same level of turnout. And again, what Trump did in rural Texas was so incredible that he was able to win the state by 5.5, despite having like 30-point underperformances in Mitt Romney in some suburban counties. So that is why Texas is kind of staying red for a bit longer than maybe some people thought. And Ramaswamy doesn't have that, and he also doesn't have the incumbency that would maybe keep him afloat in the suburbs. So I think he wins Texas, but it's like very close. It's a toss-up, and he'd obviously lose the Electoral College decisively. So that's my Biden versus Ramaswamy map. I know I went through that quickly, and I say that, I did that because it's 2 a.m. and I want to go to bed, but also because I think that this is kind of a broad theme here. Republicans have tied themselves to Trump, and that's broadly a bad thing for them, especially among suburban voters and educated voters. And so Trump has upsides, like I've talked about at the beginning of the video. In a state like Wisconsin, he has really good support among rural voters, really good support among working class voters, but he does not have that level of appeal. But Ramaswamy does not have that level of appeal, and he doesn't make up for in the suburbs. So as a result, I think Ramaswamy is worse than Trump, hence he loses the election. So thank you again. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.